Hello, welcome back to Module 2 of Materials Management. This week we're going to be covering Chapter 2 in your textbook. Chapter 2 is all about production activity control. So last week we were more about just kind of getting oriented to what materials management is an overview, but now we're going to go deeper into each of the individual subsections that involves materials management. So the first part would be production planning. When we talk about production planning, we're talking about coordinating and optimizing resources, looking at what type of materials are needed to produce, and planning out even the processes of how we're going to actually meet that customer demand. Now, the importance of production planning is it plays a vital role. Of course, just like any plans, if you don't have a plan, that's a plan for failure. So, effective production planning is all about optimizing resource utilization. When I say resources, we're talking about making sure that we have machines working correctly. We have labor, the right people who are trained to operate these machines, and also that we have the most compatible and best materials. It also brings in the issue of thinking of environmental issues as well, like how do we reduce waste, but yet still not lose out on efficiency gains. So the second part of also production planning is ensuring how customer orders are going to be fulfilled on time. And so because if orders are coming in on time, then it's going to improve customer satisfaction and loyalty because you've shown that you're now reliable. It also allows for better coordination and communication for different departments. So it's not just the manufacturing plant that's involved in planning. You have to include your sales team. So the sales team can give us forecasts on how many products were sold, what type of demographic and people are liking these products. Second would be purchasing. We have to also plan where are we going to go to purchase the materials that we need, and if we're going to go global, then what countries are we going to market our goods to? And that has a direct effect on where exactly we're going to manufacture the final product. It also enables us to have proactive identification and resolution of any, bottlenecks or any capacity constraints that might come along the way. I mean, a bottleneck could be simple as a factory machine not working, and that's going to cause a collision of events like a domino effect all throughout all the different departments involved. If you have a capacity constraint, like say that the major material that's supposed to be used in maybe producing, like when silicone chips, for example, silicone during COVID, there were no silicone chips available. So, new cars were in lots, but they were very, very expensive because without the silicone chips, the computers wouldn't work. So therefore, many compute cars are so dependent on these computer chips that it was causing chaos. And so there was a large demand for used cars as a result. So a brand new car, but it doesn't do anything because it doesn't have the chips. Secondly, planning is also involving making some accurate forecasts of the materials, figuring out what are the labor requirements, how many people do we need to be on the plant floors, and also thinking about how can we reduce either overstocking or stocking out. We want to reduce overstocking because every time you store something in a storage facility, that's money that's like kind of held up in the form of inventory. And we never want to do that because, there's the longer that it stays in inventory, then it's going to lose its value. Another issue would be also thinking about how do we improve productivity? Is it a question of do we need more dealerships? Do we need more distribution centers? Or do we need to have better trained employees to meet the growing demand for the capacity of products we're producing? And also thinking about profitability in terms of, how can we minimize downtime? How can we minimize overtime that's paid for employees? And also, how can we also expedite those costs? So planning has a financial portion that's involved as well. So so from the get-go, the production planning is going to be a very vital framework for continuous improvement because you're not just going to do planning for one day, like when the company first starts. You'll be continuously making new plans by identifying opportunities to streamline processes, thinking about how to reduce those lead times, and so that's why we're going to go a little bit deeper into the production planning process this week. And so the whole process starts with demand forecasting. So demand forecasting is when we predict future customer orders based on things like historical data, like, hey, the last 5 years, what were the sales happening at Christmas time? It was the Cabbage Patch dolls were selling, or was it, there's been an increase in plastic trees. Secondly, looking at market trends. What is the latest hype? Is it the glitter makeup or is it the hot pants that are on trend? And then making those sales projections. So after you take all of that analytic data, you try to create a master production schedule that's going to outline, how many quantities of products that we need. Also, what is the ideal time to release these finished products? Because Christmas time is one of those important times where people do spend a lot. And if you miss that important time, that's pretty much going to be a lot of revenue loss. So, and so there's lots of planning that goes on months to even years before that product actually comes out. And so, along with the production planning process, we also have to create a detailed materials requirements plan, which is called the MRP. So there are a lot of abbreviations in this chapter. I want you to take your time to make sure that you don't confuse these abbreviations and make sure that you are solid on knowing the differences between, materials requirements plan versus a material resource plan, because they kind of have the same abbreviation. So just keep that in mind. Now, the materials requirements plan is going to ensure that you have those necessary raw materials and components available when it's needed. So once you've, it's kind of like a grocery list. Once you've made the list of what you need, then it's going to explode. Then you have to now start adding a cost for them. You have to figure out how many quantities we need, how much money are we going to expend, and then that's where and so once you start putting a value or a dollar sign by all the items on your list, that's where the MRP kind of explodes into the bill of materials. The bill of materials is where you're determining the quantities, when do you need them, how frequently do you need your supplies, and and then how much do you need to have in safety stock so that your raw materials don't run out. So factory lead time, safety stock is also convinced is going to be involved in that. You also have to think about how are we going to assess the available capacity? Do we have enough machinery to be able to produce this mass quantities? I mean, what if the new iPhone comes out, for example, and we only have machinery to produce 20 phones? Well, that's a bummer, right? So that means that you didn't do a good job in production planning. You have to make sure you have the, right number of people, and also the right number of equipment, and identify any constraints or bottlenecks that might prevent you from being able to capitalize on this new product that you're releasing. But, production planning isn't limited to just new products. This is something that is even for existing products. So you're generating a detailed production schedule that kind of sequences and assigns specific orders to even work centers. So, when you're sitting there as this production planning manager, you are thinking about, how are you going to staff and also equip multiple headquarters throughout all of the United States, if you're a global company, maybe even across different countries there. And you'll be monitoring the progress that's made against the plan. And of course, you have all these forecasts for figuring out, what would be your ideal break-even point for the number of sales of items. So when I say break even, the goal would definitely be to make more profit. But break even is going to be where the amount that you've actually spent in producing that product you should be able to recoup what you've spent. And that's why you'll be constantly monitoring. And you might even have to change your plan somewhere in midstream if it turns out that your plan isn't matching with the demand for the product. And so, and also there may be quality issues. Many times, like the air fryer, for example, it was recalled because it started catching on fire. And so first everybody was so crazy about the air fryer, but then when it started going into recalls, people were hesitant to buy. There could be other disruptions. Might be that the place that you are looking to buy your raw materials ends up getting a natural disaster, maybe an earthquake or a fire. And so all of those things, have to be planned. We plan the best that we can, but hey, there's always going to be surprises. The other parts of production planning also involves looking at performance metrics. How often are we keeping up with our next day delivery or delivery within the next hour? Looking at things like the inventory turns to be able to identify where can we improve ourselves. And so, when Amazon, when they first came out, they did have certain issues with, trying to do next day delivery. It took following all the analytic data to, figure out, well, how can we make that promise viable and because that was what's going to make them to be outbeat their competitors there. So when we talk about when I talked about production planning, I also mentioned about capacity planning. So let's touch upon what capacity planning is. It's all about figuring out how much work your organization can handle, also giving consideration to whether producing the goods or even if you're delivering services, how do you meet the demands of that customer? It's kind of like planning how many ingredients you're going to need to bake a cake. You don't want to run out halfway. I mean, that's terrible. If you know you're going to have a party for 30 people, you're making a birthday cake, and you open the fridge and oops, you only see 6 eggs. 6 eggs is not going to cut it to make a cake for 30 people. Then you have to figure out, well, what are we going to do? Plan B. So hopefully you've got a bakery on dial. If not, uh-oh, you might have to think of something else. So capacity planning and resource allocation is one of the cornerstones of production planning. So you're determining the maximum output that can be produced given the available resources. When I say resources, given that you have a certain amount of equipment, certain amount of labor or materials, looking also at, a rough cut capacity planning. Rough cut is where capacity planning is where you're trying to estimate the capacity requirements based on the mass production schedule or even standard lead times or any things that or any historical data from the past. Now, capacity requirements planning is going to generate a detailed load profile for each work center based on that production schedule. So, in short, it identifies periods of either overutilization of resources or underutilization of resources. And so it helps by making decisions about adding overtime. Should we subcontract? Should we get consultants on board? Or maybe even lease additional equipment rather than buy. And that all depends on how the budget is working. If you're overspent for the year, well, you don't have money to buy a brand new factory equipment. And so resource allocation assigns specific orders and tasks to individual machines and operators. So there are a couple of capacity planning strategies that we would have to consider. That includes like level capacity. Level capacity is a strategy where you maintain a consistent output rate and building inventory during slow periods so that you can, meet those peak demands. The second strategy you could consider would be a chase capacity strategy. In chase capacity strategy, you're adjusting your output to match those demand fluctuations. And but you're still minimizing that inventory but there's always going to be that risk of requiring overtime, maybe even subcontractors or temporary workers to for when there's a sudden rise in the demand. And so that brings us to, thinking about strategic resource planning. So capacity planning kind of falls under that broader umbrella of strategic resource planning. Strategic resource planning is going to be the overarching umbrella term that's going to encompass the proactive management of the organization's resources to achieve those long-term goals and objectives. Now, by continuously monitoring and adjusting that resource allocation is exactly how businesses can maintain that competitive edge and be able to respond quickly to changes in market dynamics, changes in customer demands, and even some of the industry trends. Now, lead capacity planning is different from just regular capacity planning. Lead capacity planning is a proactive strategy. And so, with this proactive strategy, you're increasing that production capacity in anticipation of higher demand. So, Christmas season, any seasonal inflections, that would be considered lead capacity planning. We know that you're probably going to sell a lot of popcorn in Christmas time, lots of sugar. So knowing that this is something that happens seasonally during Christmas time every year, you would plan for that. Now, this approach is particularly beneficial for organizations that experience, predictable seasonal fluctuations. It's like hotel industries. They know that when it's spring break for college students, they're going to have all uh, their uh, their hotel rooms booked. So they have to plan for that, and that's when they do a mass hiring of staff to adjust for that. And so, but the drawback of lead capacity planning is it really hinges on having accurate forecasts for future demand based on those trends and historical data. So strategic plan is opposite of lead strategic planning. In contrast, lag strategy plan involves increasing the production capacity only when you see that there's a real-time increase in demand. I mean, you're directly observing it happening. Now, this is kind of a reactive approach. It's often employed in industries where the demand patterns are unpredictable or they're highly dynamic, like especially like in healthcare or emergency services. I wouldn't say that it's going to be only in construction or those type of things. Now, another approach would be the match strategy planning. The match strategy planning approach combines the strengths of both lead capacity planning and lag capacity strategies, but it offers more of a balanced and dynamic solution to capacity planning. Now, this strategy is going to require you to continuously monitor the actual demand, the market trends and forecasts, and then you would incrementally adjust that capacity to match any observed patterns that you see. So it's kind of like the mid-go if you're not, comfortable with making drastic changes. But again, it depends on the industry that you're in to before you just write it off. Now, I want to make a distinction here because this term is used interchangeably. There's a difference between capacity planning and resource planning. And there's often a lack of clarity between these two terms. Now, while both of these two concepts are closely intertwined, it's really important that you know that little hairline of a difference so that you can ensure there's effective operational planning and execution. And so capacity planning is a strategic, forward-looking process that aims to align the organization's resources with its projected demand. It also involves a comprehensive analysis of like the workforce capabilities, the tool availabilities, the production capacities, so you can ensure that the right resources are in place to meet those future customer requirements. Now, resource planning, on the other hand, is more of a tactical short-term endeavor. It focuses on having efficient allocation and utilization of existing resources within just that organization. Okay. Now, resource planning involves things like assigning tasks and projects to those available resources, even taking into account the skills that are available and making sure that you match that with a realistic workload for each worker. So in a nutshell, the primary objective of resource planning is to maximize productivity and efficiency of the organization's current resource pool. That ensures that the tasks do get completed on time and within budget. But now, if we go back to now, but then, so the key difference here that I'm trying to point out here is that capacity planning and resource planning are complementary processes, but they differ in several key aspects. Now, in terms of scope, capacity planning is more strategic and organization-wide view, and it's considering the overall resource landscape and the future demand. Resource planning, on the other hand, is more focused on short-term tactical planning, and it's really looking at specific resources and individual tasks on a project. The second way that these two terms differ is that capacity planning is more of a long-term endeavor. When I say long-term, we're talking about spanning like months to years. So it's going to be depending on forecasting future demand and then adjusting those resources accordingly. But resource planning, however, is going to be more of an immediate short-term horizon, dealing with, how are we going to allocate these resources over weeks or months? And and then they also differ in terms of the objective. The primary objective of capacity planning is to ensure that the organization has the resources to meet that projected demand and also to meet the overarching mission and vision for the organization to enable their growth and maintain that competitive edge. Now, resource planning, on the other hand, is all about, right now, right here. It aims to kind of maximize that efficiency and productivity of an organization's current resource pool. Now, now the fourth distinction is the resource types. Capacity planning is more of a broad range of resources. When I say broad range of resources, I'm talking about workforce, tools, equipment, raw materials. Resource planning, on the other hand, is more focused primarily on human resources and their skills and training and availability. So, by understanding that both of these have distinct and complementary objectives, organizations will need both to have a comprehensive strategy that incorporates both processes and it enables them to proactively manage the resource landscape while at the same time ensuring that there's efficient utilization of their existing resources that are right before their eyes for today. All right, so let's look at some aggregate planning strategies. So when we talk about production strategies overall are long-term plans for the production of goods and services. And so another way that they're referred to is also called aggregate planning strategies. So aggregate planning strategies are aiming to achieve a central goal or objective that's established by the company's management team. A production strategy functions kind of as that guide for the production department by determining the type of technology to use, the level of investment for the production schedule, and even what kind of training the production staff may require. Okay, so with that, I kind of did mention a couple before, but there are three basic strategies that can be used to develop this production plan. And this is we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the strategies that I mentioned earlier. So there's chase strategy, there's leveling production strategy, there's also hybrid. Now, each of it has its own operational cost advantages and disadvantages. So it's really the responsibility of the manufacturing management to select what's the best combination of this basic plan so that we still, come out with, minimizing the total costs that are spent to maintain the customer service levels. All right, so going back to chase strategy. Chase strategy is when a company's production is going to match that demand that's set forth by the market. And so this process is a lean production strategy. We'll learn a lot about lean probably at the end of the semester. So don't panic yet. And so with lean production strategy, we're looking at ways of keeping the inventory costs low, and the production schedule is going to function as the order basis. And so by doing it this way, we're minimizing the risk of having unsold products. It also promotes efficient use of manufacturing resources, ensures that the company's production capacity is flexible to be able to adjust to market demands. So the chase strategy is helpful for those businesses that may be just starting out and they have limited resources, or for those who manufacture products for a very small niche market. So, for example, companies that produce Halloween items, they would use a chase strategy. So, because demand for these types of products are within that Halloween time frame only. So that awareness of when demand increases is going to help production department adjust its manufacturing processes. Now, the second one is level production strategy. Level production is focusing on producing the same number of units per product at a consistent rate, irrespective of what the market demand is. So these would be like your day-to-day supplies like toothbrush, toothpaste, everyone, deodorant. Oh my gosh, we got to have deodorant. So the strategy lowers production costs and it minimizes the risk of carrying obsolete goods. So industries that have limited production capabilities or they are trying to address cyclical needs typically use this type of production strategy. Now, with the level production strategy, the companies can keep the stocking inventory during the non-peak seasons while still being ready to ship at higher volumes in case that the demand just suddenly increases. So for example, like a McDonald's or a fast food industry, they would use level production. Companies in these industries typically function in a high demand, low margin scenario for products they sell. So they would definitely be stocking up potatoes for French fries. And so the level production strategy ensures that production is consistently meeting that demand. So, and of course, the hybrid is kind of a mix of those two. All right, so let's kind of dive into a couple of more production strategies. Make to stock, assemble to order, make to order, and engineer to order. And I'm going to kind of point out what the differences are, because I know when you read the textbook, they almost sound like they're very similar. So the engineer to order strategy is very similar to the MTO or made to order, in that the manufacturing of products is relying on first receiving those orders. But here's where the main distinction is between those strategies. Unlike, made to order, engineer to order involves design. We're at the design stage or engineering of that ordered product. So companies that use this strategy may only carry an inventory of standard components like chemicals, steel, or either customized, Lamborghini Bugattis. They're not going to make 1,000 Lamborghini Bugattis. They are going to make it only when the order comes. But because it has to be custom designed, you want to know what color it is, you want to know what type of leather seats, all of those things. So some examples of engineered to design products could include things like emergency vehicles, especially like fire trucks, bespoke building materials like windows, shutters, closures, heavy machinery and industry tools, biotech assemblies and labs, buildings and other specialized structures. Now, let's kind of differentiate between make to stock and make to order. So, make to stock, companies use make to stock strategy when they base their production on a product with a very predictable demand in the market. That production strategy is probably one of the most common ones and it expands into various industries like consumable goods, clothing, agriculture, and technology. So, for example, we might have a business that produces baby products, such as diapers or pacifiers. They would follow a make to stock strategy. So the make to stock approach, essentially, it's a pull system because a pull system is where the production is triggered by the actual customer orders, which leads to reduced inventory, but potentially longer lead times for customers. And so, whereas the made to stock So here are the takeaways I want you to keep with you. The MTS strategy, made to stock, depends on matching production and inventory with that forecasted demand. Secondly, the products are produced prior to receiving the customer's order. The order is completed by picking item from an existing stock. So the advantages of having the made to stock is that customer orders are pulled from an existing pre-manufactured stock. So that allows you to be able to fulfill the orders instantaneously. Now, the drawback, of course, there's significant upfront expenses of developing inventory while also running into the risk of either underproducing or overproducing if your forecasted demand turns out to be inaccurate. So again, the examples I gave you for that would be seasonal clothing like coats and stuff. So remember when Florida got snow a couple of years back? And so there wasn't a store in sight that sold any coats. So you had regular Florida folks walking around in shorts and trying to and they couldn't find a coat at all. So seasonal clothing is going to require fabrication before the customer orders. And so to be able to, and so that was something they had not planned for. And same thing, you're not going to find shorts or bathing suits if you go to probably Alaska in the wintertime or places with heavy snow. And so to meet that future market demand, clothing manufacturers will forecast demand based on past data and then produce according to those predetermined figures. Now, overproduced items are then kind of sold at either liquidation prices or they're given to Goodwill to sell. So it'll deplete that inventory and make room for newly produced items. Now, make to order is a strategy is quite different from make to stock. Make to order strategy relies on receiving the orders to manufacture the products. Now, this production method kind of prevents businesses from creating a dependence on that market demand and helps them kind of simplify that whole inventory control. Made to order is typically present companies that offer customization of their products, like computer hardware, automobile components, industrial equipment. So the key takeaways I want you to remember for made to order is that under the made to order, products are only produced after they get the customer order. And the advantage is that it enables a customer to purchase products that are very customized to their exact specifications and demand. So like a wedding ring, that would be an example of a made to order. It's got to be fit the bride. It's got to also have the stones she likes, right? And so MTO is typically going to be in producing, it works best for companies that build products with a high variety of customization, or even for companies that build expensive products that require significant investment before production can take place. So, in terms of advantages, it can they're able to complete the product customization while also reducing some of their inventory costs. And you don't really have to worry too much about overproduction or underproduction because you don't produce anything until you get a customer order in. Now, the drawback is that MTOs tend to have longer lead times than other traditional strategies. And so you may not make money on a regular basis, but when you do sell something, you get a large sum of money. So, manufacturers of aircrafts would be one example because aircraft manufacturers will only manufacture their products after they get an order and there's a contract in place. And of course, airplane is going to be too expensive to just predict to get production and just store it there if you don't have, a buyer who has a secure investment in place. So that kind of makes sense, right? Now, of course, so let's see. I also want to touch upon assemble to order. This is another term that also confuses students. Assemble to order is a production strategy where companies produce products on a customer order basis. They're storing their inventory on an assembly ready components. So think of this assemble to order kind of like Legos. They've got all the prefabricated parts, but they won't assemble those together until an order comes in. And so this means that companies possess all the necessary parts of the goods, but they only proceed to assemble these when they actually receive an order. Now, what kind of company would employ such a strategy? A company that's looking at avoiding stocking large quantities of products, and that can help to reduce some of those inventory costs. So so let me give you some example of that too. And so first example of like an assemble to order would be here. Imagine a scenario that you want a brand new laptop and you want it tailored to your specific needs. Now, in this example, you're the customer. The manufacturer will offer an assemble to order strategy for creating a customized laptop. And of course, before you even place that order, the manufacturer is going to already have in stock some of the basic components like the motherboard, the screen, the keyboard, the battery. But these components are standard and they're widely available on all laptop models. Now, you, as the customer, are going to visit the manufacturer's website or store to order your laptop. You're not just choosing from a list of pre-made laptops. Instead, you get to customize it. You might say, hey, I want pink colored keyboard keys. You might decide that you want it to have a particular insignia or your initials on it. So you start by selecting the features you want. You'd pick maybe the processor, the amount of RAM, the storage size, even the color of the laptop. Now, once you've made those selections and placed the order, the manufacturer doesn't need to start from scratch because they already have those components with them. So it's time to now assemble your laptop according to your specifications. So they'll attach the motherboard to the screen, they'll insert the RAM, they'll also install, the processor that you chose and assemble all the parts. So this is how assemble to order works. Now, the benefit is that there's a low inventory risk because you can most of the parts of that laptop are freely interchangeable. And so it prevents having to have costly overstocking. And so you don't, and there's also greater flexibility for a variety of customers. So when I say flexibility, I'm saying that assemble to order gives customers, more variety because they get to be part of the customization process. And so this can be an advantage when in fierce competition because customers want something that's unique and offers these unique options there. All right, so we've got you set up for chapter two. We've covered most of the terms that tend to, confuse students. Now I'm going to leave you to go read chapter two, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me.